going to go to, that's recording on the computer. And now I'll go to Facebook Live. When we get done, I'll put it everywhere else later today.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So glad to see you again.
Yes, it's so nice. It's been a while.
Yes, we went to that. We're
That
not
crazy
live yet. We're not live yet, so I can say it. We were at that Todd Mondesi thing.
Yeah, he probably still hasn't gotten there yet. There are probably still people waiting for him.
Okay, I'm gonna hit go live now. Hilarious. I'll do the intro to the show. Hi, everybody. Are we live or are we live? So great to see all of you here. And I know how you are out there. You watch after the fact, and that's perfectly fine. Thank you for all the views, etc., etc. The show, as you know, is not about me. It's about my guests. Today, we have interview number 1140, but who's counting? Me. And he is my hero, my personal hero, because of the books he's read and the things he's accomplished in his journey in the arts. So I'd like to start the show off with a bang by reading his personal bio. So here we go. People often refer to Jeffrey Gurian as a Renaissance man because he's involved in so many things. He's a comedy writer, performer, director, best-selling Amazon author with 8 books, a producer, radio personality, motivational speaker, and doctor, and not always in that order. He's written for and worked with some of the biggest stars in comedy. And I recognize all these names. Oh yeah, he's worked with some of the biggest stars in comedy, from Rodney Dangerfield, Joan Rivers, George Wallace, Gilbert Gottfried, Phil Hartman, Richard Belzer, Jerry Lewis, and Andrew Dice Clay, among many others, to the stars of today, like Tracy Morgan, Bill Burr, Nick Kroll, John Mulaney, for whom he starred in the viral Too Much Tuna sketch on Comedy Central. He was, and get a load of this, folks, he was Patrice O'Neill's co-host on the Black Phillip Show on XM Radio and has been profiled. This is blowing my mind. He's been profiled in the New York Times and on every TV station coming out of New York. And guess what? He's here today. So welcome him right now, the one and only Jeffrey Gurian. Woo!
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you so much. I always say, with an introduction like that, I better be good.
That's hilarious. You
Thank
are
you for
so
having me.
funny. I met you in person at a show in New York City, and I know that you're a doll, a dreamboat. You're the so real, so authentic, and I didn't even get to see you perform, but I know that about you just from having sat next to you and get to talk to you for a snippet of time. So
Well,
here's my first question.
go ahead.
What makes you so wonderful? What in your life?
That's very kind of you to say. I've been studying spirituality for about 30 years. And by the way, I just want to ask, I don't see me. Are you able to see me on the screen? Because
Yeah.
I only see you, and I see my jacket and my face is cut off. So you see me?
Yes, everything's perfect.
Okay, great. As I said, I've been studying spirituality for about 30 years, and the essence of spirituality is to detach from ego. And show business is all about ego. And it's like Jackie Mason once told me, and I never forgot this. He said, when you go in to buy a shirt, the guy just gives you the shirt. He doesn't give you the shirt and a picture of himself and say, this is who I am and this is what I do. But in our business, you're always telling people who you are and what you do and how much press you have. and it can really change people. And so I strive to understand that these are things, that I've been able to accomplish through grace, and it's not always just through me. And I try to treat everybody the same way. Humility is very important to me. And it's funny because I once had a friend, and he used to say about himself, "No one has more humility than I do." He would he would brag about his own humility, and I thought that was hilarious. So if that's true, uh, what you say, maybe it's an energy thing that people pick up on the fact I go through life with the motto that I love everyone until you teach me not to. I embrace everybody. And people say that that's why I get so many people on my YouTube channel, on Comedy Matters TV, that everyone stops off to talk to me because I'm supportive. I don't want to trap anybody into saying anything uncomfortable. I'm not looking for scoops at somebody else's expense. I value people and I want to support talented people. And so my work is always positive. My goal has always been to put positive energy out to the universe. And hopefully that comes across in the interviews that I do and in my performances, and people seem to respond to that. So I hope that's an answer.
That's a fabulous answer. Here's my next question. I love to know who people were growing up, like at marker age 5, high school, college. Who were you? Jobs you did before you got into the industry, and then we can talk about who you are today.
Sure. I was an unusual kid. My mother told me that I taught myself to read before I went to kindergarten. And I skipped a couple of grades. I was in college when I was 16. But when I was 12, I decided what I wanted to do for my whole life, which as an adult, I think back about it, it's very strange, very unusual. I knew I wanted to be a doctor, but I was a very sensitive child. I didn't know at the time that I was an empath. I feel things very deeply, more than I want to. And so there was a time in my life, if I was with you and you were sad, I was sadder for you than you were. I overfelt my feelings. And when you're a kid, you don't know what to do with that. So I knew I couldn't handle life and death situations. I'm like, how am I going to be a doctor if I can't handle life and death? Right. And I was wearing braces at the time, and I said, you know what? I'm going to be an orthodontist. I'll be and I'll make people look beautiful. I'll give them a great smile. And I was already writing comedy at 12 years old. For the benefit of my friends, I would write things that I thought was funny and show it to people. And it used to bother me. I'm like, well, I want to be a dentist and I want to be in comedy, but how can you do both? Who ever heard of such a thing? And it used to really bother me. I remember laying in bed as a kid thinking about how can you possibly do that? And somehow I managed to make that happen. And so when I got older, like one of the things that I talk about as a child is I stuttered very badly. I started stuttering about 6 or 7 years old. And I stuttered through my 20s and beyond, even into my 30s. I was blocking on certain words. And when I went to college, I made myself run for the president of the freshman class. I've always believed in confronting fear. And even though I came from a very loving and supportive family, for some reason, I grew up with a lot of fears. I was not taught that the world was a safe place. And so so many things made me nervous. Even today, I battle fear, I would say almost on a daily basis, but I never let it stop me. So when I went to college, I went into a very big college, Hunter College. It was a city school. It was fed into by 7 different high schools. And I only knew the kids from my high school, and I couldn't say my name. I could never say Gurian. Most stutterers have a very hard time saying their own name. And the reason, I think, is because your name is your identity. And if you're not happy with who you are, it's very difficult to tell people who you are. So I decided I wanted to run for the president of the freshman class despite the fact I'm 16, everybody else is 18 or 19. And I never really felt like I fit in, even though I was supposedly popular, but I didn't feel it. The reason I say that is when I went to high school, they still did things in the yearbook like the prettiest girl and the handsomest guy and the best athlete and whatever. And I was voted most talented because I played the piano and I played the drums and I sang. And so it was a popularity contest, but I never really felt it. I didn't feel like I was part of. I didn't feel like I fit in. So I go to college and I run for president and I get other kids who knew me to introduce me to kids I didn't know and say, this is Jeffrey Gurian, he's running for president, vote for this kid, whatever. And I told myself if I could win the election, I wouldn't have to stutter anymore because it would tell me that people liked me. I guess I had a feeling that people didn't like me. Despite the fact of all the evidence that I had that people did like me, I had these negative thoughts, which many years later led to me writing books on happiness. And I'll tell you about that. But anyway, I won the election. I was the president of the whole freshman class of Hunter College, and I still stuttered. And it was one of my great first lessons because it taught me that outside validation doesn't work in life. It doesn't matter how many people tell you that you're fantastic and wonderful and talented. It matters what you think of yourself. And that started my journey on trying to understand my mind and what thoughts I was holding that were not valid for me. Because I realized that I didn't stutter when I was alone. I could go into a room by myself and speak perfectly, but I only stutter when I was trying to talk to you. So I consider it grace. I was given the knowledge to figure out that you can't have a disability based on your location, right? If a man has a limp, he limps in every room of his house. He can't go into a room and close the door and walk perfectly. But if I could speak fine when I'm alone, then theoretically it means that there's nothing wrong with me. And so that started my journey on curing myself because I had been to speech therapy and no one was able to help me. And interestingly enough, now, so many years later, as an avocation, I work with stutterers all over the world and I teach them how not to stutter. And one of the people that I work with is his fiance is a speech therapist and she can help him, but I'm helping him with my techniques. They don't learn much about stuttering when they become a speech therapist. She even told him they talked about it for a few hours on one day in speech therapy school, whatever school they call that, however they refer to it. And so I started working on myself to take my mind apart, to examine my thoughts and to see what it was what thoughts I was holding that were not valid for me. And I realized that we're all holding thoughts that we gather from the time we're children, and I call them heart wounds. And every time someone hurts your feelings or breaks a promise to you or insults you or bullied you as a child, we keep all those things inside of us, those negative thoughts. And even though we don't want to believe them, on some level we hold on to them, and they affect our self-esteem and they affect our self-confidence. And in doing that, they affect every decision we make in our lives. Because every time you're called upon to make a decision, Linda, you use your thoughts. You think about what you should do. And if your thoughts are faulty, if your thoughts are not valid, then your decisions are not going to work out for you, which is why people get the same patterns in their lives, the same bad job over and over again, the same bad relationship over and over again that doesn't work out. And the only common denominator is you. You're the person who keeps showing up in all these events. Everybody else is different. So it must be something that you're doing. And so I was fascinated by that. And many, many years later, that's what led to my first happiness book called Healing Your Heart by Changing Your Mind, a spiritual and humorous approach to achieving happiness. And it's very hard to get a dog to sit in lotus position. I don't know if you know that, but it's very hard. So as I got older, after I graduated from college, I went to dental school. I fulfilled that dream of becoming a dentist. It was very difficult for me. And in my junior year, I met Woody Allen, who was my comedy idol at the time, and he read all of my earliest material. And he encouraged me to make films out of it. He said my comedy was very visual and that I should consider making films, which I did years later. I made these crazy films that are on my Comedy Matters TV channel for the Men Who series. And it was part of the Toyota Comedy Festival that debuted at Caroline's. And they starred Gilbert Gottfried and Richard Belzer and Pat Cooper, who just left us recently in his 90s. And they were about men who do very unusual things because I like absurd comedy, like men who take a pitchfork to the movies, men who enjoy Latin dancing with tools. I had a guy who did the tango with a wrench that was unbelievable. And in one of the greatest films, it was called Men Who Dance Where They're Not Supposed to. Uh, a, a guy gets arrested for dancing in a no dancing zone. And who was that guy? Peter Dinklage, the star of Game of Thrones, before he was famous, starred in my film as the man who got arrested for dancing in a no dancing zone. So that takes you a little bit into my history. And I want to give you a chance to talk because since I stopped stuttering, you can't even stop me from talking. I talk a lot.
Somebody
Did I?
knocked at my door. I had to say
Oh,
no.
okay. I thought you were leaving. I didn't know what happened.
No,
So,
please keep talking. This is
so I said, since I stopped stuttering, you can't even shut me up. So I want to give you a chance to ask me other questions because I went through my childhood into dental school through Woody Allen. And, after I got out of dental school, um, that's when I started working on comedy for real, and it wasn't until a few years later I started getting articles done about me in different magazines. People found it interesting that I had these two seemingly diverse careers, and I started getting a lot of press. And then I went up to Saturday Night Live. But I don't want to do the whole thing. I'll let you ask me questions and then I'll fill you in.
all
Okay?
righty. Well, you mystify me because hearing you talk about your books paints a better picture than me just reading about your books. So your books cut out all the riffraff. They just get to the issues. And I didn't know how you were raised to be so concerned with important matters in life and not about ego. So this what you've said has been strategic in helping me understand how somebody can be so accomplished and yet still so touching on the important things of life. So now I have the connection between you and what all you've accomplished and how you've done it staying humble. That makes it all clear to me. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. It's very important, as they say, don't believe the hype. There's a lot of very famous people that are really obnoxious when you meet them because their ego is so big and you can feel it. And it's very uncomfortable. And it's just important to be in the spiritual world. They say try to become a worker among workers, just another person. Maybe you do very special things and that's very nice, but you can't just feel that you're so much better than everyone else. It's important to embrace people. So when Saturday Night Live came out, I decided I needed to get involved with that show. And it's a funny story because I was driving what could only be described as a pimp mobile in those days. I had bought a car that was made for one of the Isley brothers. I had met this pimp from Maryland, and he drove a gold Eldorado, a Cadillac Eldorado, with a clear bubble over the driver's seat and a clear bubble over the passenger seat, like the Pope's car. It was in those days in New York, all the pimps drove these really flashy Cadillacs. And for some reason, that was my taste. And I said, I need a car like that. So I went to this place in the Bronx and I bought a car that was made for one of the Isley brothers. I got confirmation of that many years later by one of the Isley brothers' family. who told me whose car that was. He decided not to take it, and I bought it. It was a mandarin orange Cadillac. I have pictures of the car. It actually appeared, they did a documentary about me in 2020 called Who the F is Jeffrey Gurian? And they animated that scene where I met Woody Allen and when I went up to Saturday Night Live in that car. So I bought a Rolls Royce grill for the car because that's what the pimps did. And my wife is like, we're Jewish and we live in Scarsdale. Why am I driving an orange Cadillac? She didn't get, nobody got it but me. So I decided I needed to get involved with Saturday Night Live. And I was doing crazy little films at the time. I was making films on my Super 8 camera. And they were little strange films like false news items, like several men were arrested for smearing cream cheese on the ankles of elderly women who wore their stockings rolled down like bagels. You ever see the old women with the stockings rolled down around their ankles? It looked like bagels to me. So I went to my dear grandmother who had a great sense of humor. She and her husband owned a nightclub growing up, and I grew up in that environment. She was very cool, and she made believe she had a Jewish accent. And she said, you know, in the Jewish religion, we have two kind of stockings, one for milk and one for meat. She goes, and this crazy man, he smeared cream cheese on my meat stockings, and I can't get it off. And I zoomed in with the camera on her ankles, and then I did a special on prominent businessmen who wear swim fins to the office, and I interviewed very prominent, very successful men in every field wearing these big swim fins that told me why it was important to wear swim fins in their work. And I wanted to do a heart surgeon during surgery, and I couldn't find a heart surgeon. So as a dentist, I went to my oral surgeon, who was a very famous oral surgeon. He was known in many hospitals. And I asked him if he would wear swim fins in surgery. And we snuck into Einstein Hospital at night with a whole surgical crew. And I interviewed him. I bust in during the surgery. I interrupt him during surgery, not knowing that it had always been his dream to be on television. And he walks away during the surgery wearing these huge, immense swim fins. And he gives me this great interview on why he feels it's important to wear swim fins in the operating room. And so I bring this up to Saturday Night Live. I pull up to the front in this pimp mobile because in those days there was no terrorism, so there was no security. You could drive right up to 30 Rock. The street was open. And I drive up and I throw the doorman a few bucks and I said, watch my car. Lorne Michaels is expecting me. Lorne Michaels had never heard of me. You know, I had a lot of, I was very brave in those days, you know, in my 20s. And so I snuck past the security. I got in the elevator and I get up to, I guess it was the 17th floor in those days. I don't remember exactly. And Alan Zweibel is playing handball on the wall. Now, Alan Zweibel has gone on to become an award-winning producer, director, comedy writer. In those days, he was one of the head writers at Saturday Night Live. And he was playing handball on the wall with Neil Levy, who was a cousin of Lorne Michaels. And I step off the elevator, and this is who I meet. And I introduced myself as a comedy writer, and I said I brought these films, and I showed them to him. He was nice enough to sit and watch them with me. To this day, all these decades later, he says he can't get the image out of his mind of cream cheese on the ankles. Yes. Seeing an elderly woman with cream cheese on the ankles. He can't, he said that image is burnt into my consciousness. It'll never leave. So he did one of the nicest things for me. He didn't just give me the phone number. He called his manager, a man named David Jonas, who was managing Freddie Prinze at the time. Freddie Prinze was a big comedy star in those days, and he got him the show Chico and the Man. And he said to David, you have to meet with this kid. He's got very funny films and, you know. So David spent about a year trying to talk me out of show business because he said to me, you're a doctor. What do you need this for? What are you, crazy? He was a real character, a real character. As a matter of fact, the first time I went to Saturday Night Live to see the show, I took his daughter with me as my date. And who was sitting in my seat? In those days, they had assigned seats. I don't know if they still do, but in those days, they had assigned seats. Who was sitting in my seat? Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I had to ask him to move. Now, that's another funny story because in those days, Arnold Schwarzenegger was not a huge star yet, but I used to love bodybuilding magazines. And I used to say to the woman that I wound up marrying, I said, don't ever let this guy insult you, Arnold Schwarzenegger, because I don't want to have to fight with him. And of all people in the world, he's sitting in my seat at Saturday Night Live, and I had to ask him to move. And he was so nice. We actually became friends, and I wound up writing for him. He was doing a spot on the Mike Douglas show, which was a talk show in those days. And I actually wrote jokes for him. And I have a letter that I read in that documentary. I found a letter from him thanking me. I think it was on Golden Oak Productions. But that's how my life has been. It's been so weird that I wound up meeting all these people. So because Alan Zweibel sent me to David Jonas, I started writing jokes for comedians like Dick Capri and Freddie Roman, who went on to become the head of the Friars Club, and all the comics that he handled. And through them, through Dick Capri, I met Rodney Dangerfield, and he was the first big star I wound up writing for that started doing my jokes on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And that kind of made me an industry name. People started hearing about me because I was writing for them. And then I started writing for the Friars Roasts. And I was the main writer for the Friars Roast for 12 years. So I got to write for Jerry Lewis when he was roasted, and Bruce Willis when he was roasted, and Chuck Scarborough on the news. I got to meet all the news people, and they were doing stories about me, and that's what led to the New York Times, a cover story in the New York Times. So it's been a crazy ride, Linda. It's been, from trying to achieve your goal. I was very driven in those days, and I would let nothing stand in my way. I don't think I could do that now, but in those days, there were only 3 people I ever wanted to meet as a younger person: Woody Allen, Salvador Dali, and the Beach Boys. And I met them all, and I spent an evening with each of them. Salvador Dali, that was an amazing story. And the Beach Boys, I loved their music. They got me through my depression in high school. And I got to meet everybody that I ever wanted to meet. Which, when people ask me how, I'm like, I don't even know how. I don't even have an answer for that. When I did the book on the comic strip with Chris Rock, the owner of the comic strip, Richie Tinkin, came to my apartment to interview me. And there's a picture in the book of the day I suggested it to him. It was around 2008. Gilbert Gottfried and I were at the comic strip, and we were coaching. Oh, I'm blanking on her name. She was a news commentator that wanted to do stand-up comedy. Ann Curry. Ann Curry. We were coaching her on how to do stand-up comedy. And I looked at the walls of the comic strip at all the huge stars that came out of there. And I said to Richie, did anybody ever do a book on this club? Somebody needs to do a book here. And he said, a lot of people have approached me, but I never felt comfortable with it. And he came to my house to interview me. And when he walked in and he saw all the pictures on my wall, my house is like a comedy museum that has photos that go back 30 years and more, with me and like Milton Berle, who was my sponsor in the Friars Club, which was one of my greatest honors. And he said to me, looking around at this wall, he goes, I think you're the guy to do the book. And he trusted me to do the book on the history of the comic strip, which we worked on for 4 years.
Wow.
And Chris Rock wrote the introduction to it because he was so grateful for his success. It took 3 years to do all the interviews with Jerry Seinfeld and Colin Quinn and Susie Essman and Lisa Lampanelli and Ray Romano, every big star that came out, even Billy Crystal. I did his interview. He was the first comic to hit the stage in 1976. June 1st, 1976, when it opened. Billy Crystal was on stage. And I did his interview at his office in Beverly Hills. but everybody else came into the club to sit with me because I don't do phone interviews, and nobody was doing Zoom in those days. It was all in person. Jim Gaffigan came in, just everybody who was a big star that came out of that club. And it took 3 years to do the interviews and a year to edit because I wound up with 500 pages and the editor only wanted 250. And how do you cut out stories from Jerry Seinfeld? I mean, it took a year to figure out what to do. But anyway, again, I'm going on and on. So I want to give you an opportunity to ask me questions because I have more stories than I even realize. I don't even know how many stories I have. When I start telling them, one leads to the other.
Yes. So you had three groups of people that you wanted to meet: the Beach Boys, Salvador Dali, and somebody else. Who was that? A third?
Woody Allen.
Yeah. Okay. I have to ask you, what was it like getting to meet, work with, write for, hang out, be friends with Woody Allen?
Well, it's so funny because in that story, I was a junior in dental school and I met him 2 other times throughout the years. We have pictures together. There was a very rare moment, but at the time that I met him, I'm a junior in dental school. He's starring in a play called Play It Again, Sam, with Tony Roberts, who was his favorite star. He would always work with Tony Roberts. And I knew I needed to meet him because I wanted to write for him. And I had no money. I was a student, a poor dental student in Philadelphia at Temple University. And I knew that if you're going to go meet a big star, you have to show them that you're sane. Why are they? I mean, big stars are not going to the theater hoping to meet young men who are aspiring to be in the comedy world. So I'm like, how am I going to impress him that I'm sane and that I'm not a lunatic? So I said, well, there's only two ways to show that you're sane. You either wear a tie or you bring a pretty girl with you. And I didn't have a tie, and I only knew one pretty girl, and she hated me because we had just broken up. I begged her. I still know her. She's in my life today as a friend. Her name was Leslie, and I begged her to come with me. And she knew that it was my dream to meet Woody Allen, so she agreed. And so I borrowed my father's car. I guess I finally got enough money to buy tickets to the show. And I had been on my rare trips to New York, I would go to the theater and I would leave notes for Woody as if I knew him on the back of my dental school card. I just about 10 days ago, I was the keynote speaker in Minneapolis for the Academy of General Dentistry. It was a big honor. They invited me to come to the Minneapolis Convention Center and speak to about 500 dentists for the Academy of General Dentistry's annual convention. They were interested in my story about how I combined dentistry and comedy because they said dentists have the highest rate of suicide and the highest rate of divorce. And I told them, I did the divorce. I'm trying to put off the suicide for a while. And I told them the Woody Allen story because they were very interested in hearing it. So I was leaving notes on the back of my dental school card for Woody. And I said, Woody, it's Jeffrey, and I haven't seen you in a long time, and I'll be coming to the show. And because Woody did very strange comedy, I was leaving very unusual comments like, let's open up a day camp and throw winter clothes at people. I said, and let's walk low like we used to in Europe. And I was leaving these very strange notes. I'm bringing my cardboard thumb. I thought I needed to impress him with absurd comments, right? So the night finally comes. I leave my last note on my dental school card. Woody, I'm here and I'll be back during intermission. I was just a kid. I was like 22, 23. I didn't know you wait till the end of the show. I go back during intermission. I tell them, okay. So intermission comes and I can still picture this. I'm sitting in the audience with her and I'm like, I'm too nervous to go. And she goes, you have to do this. I came with you. You can't back out. So I go to the stage door. And again, in those days, there's no terrorism. There's no security. I open the door. The stage manager is not even in his seat. and I take her hand and I run up the stairs, and I went the wrong way. I wound up on the roof. There was nothing there. So I came back down. The stage manager is in his seat, and he says to me, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes, Woody's expecting me." And he said, "Oh, go right in." Didn't ask a question, "Who are you?" Nothing, just go right in. So I go to his dressing room and it's empty. He's in Tony Roberts' dressing room with the whole cast. Now I'm really nervous. I'm in a panic. She goes, "You can't back out. You got to do this. I'm here with you." So I go to the room and I can picture it like it was yesterday, Linda, as all these years ago, but it's indelibly etched in my mind. Woody is sitting on a couch across the room, and they animated this in the documentary that they did about me. I look in the room and I go like this to him, like a child. And he goes like, "Me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you." And he comes over and he's actually holding my card. And he says to me, "You must be Jeff." And at that, I lost it. And I started saying ridiculous things, like I said before. And I said, the Aztecs weren't too good at tap dancing, but boy, could they sway. And he looked at the girl I'm with. He goes, "This guy's an effing nut," just like that. And I realized I was overly excited. I'm meeting my idol. So I calmed down and I said, "I'm a comedy writer and I write stuff, and everyone says my stuff is just like yours. And I wanted to come and meet you." And he said, "Well, I'm in the middle of a show. You think you could come back tomorrow night?" And I was like, "Oh, no, I'm much too busy." I'm like, "Of course." I didn't say that. I said, "Of course I'll come back tomorrow night." So I begged the same girl to please come with me. I had the nerve to do that, and she agreed to come with me. I remember it was pouring rain. I picked her up. I had my dad's car. I picked her up in Co-op City in the Bronx. We come. Woody sits with me for an hour. He looked over all my material, and I don't think I even had scripts. I think I had scraps of paper in an envelope with ideas that led to the Men Who series. And he said to me, I remember sitting with him in this little dressing room with a mirror, and he looked through all my stuff. Now, my dream was he was going to say, "Jeffrey, I'm going to quit the show. Let's do movies together," right? Obviously, that didn't happen. It was a child's dream. I'm a kid, so I'm thinking this is what's going to happen, right? But he said to me, "Your comedy is very visual, and you should think of making a film out of it." And as I told you, that's what I did years later. He was the inspiration for that. So years later, I get friendly with Jack Rollins. Now, Jack Rollins was one of the most famous comedy managers of all time. He handled Woody Allen, Robin Williams, and Billy Crystal all at the same time, among other people. I wrote a letter to Jack Rollins on my dental school stationery. And I told him, well, no, at that point I was in practice already. So it was my professional stationery. So Jack called me down to his office to meet with him. And he was fascinated by my story. And he wound up being a very big supporter of mine and sending me back up to Saturday Night Live to meet with Herb Sargent, who is one of the most famous comedy writers of all time. And when Jack heard the story about Woody, he thought it was amazing. He said, "Woody must have really seen something in you, because it wasn't like him to do stuff like that, to actually invite you back and sit with you." And so I wrote a film called I Am Woody about a violent mob boss who was obsessed with Woody Allen. It won some awards. It was a short comedy film about 40 minutes long. One of the Sopranos actually starred in it. And Jack said to me that it was really amazing that Woody did that. And he said he couldn't show the script to Woody, but he said to me, "There are lines in here that you wrote that Woody could have written. That's how similar you are to Woody Allen." And many years later, Jack said to me once, he said to me, "How come I never managed you?" And I said, "Jack, I don't know whether I should be happy or jump off my terrace. It wasn't my place to ask you to manage me. You're one of the most famous comedy managers of all time." He wanted Billy Crystal to play me in a sitcom. He thought that a sitcom about a dentist in show business would be amazing. And that's how I met Billy Crystal. He invited me to his office to meet Billy and to meet Robin Williams. And Billy was too busy. He was never able to do it. But Jack arranged for me to interview a guy named Michael Davis, who was a juggler that he was handling at the time. He used to juggle bowling balls, as I remember, and he performed at the White House. And I didn't really see it, but he sent me. I was lecturing in Hawaii at the time. I guess this was the mid 80s. I was lecturing on cosmetic dentistry in Hawaii. And Jack said to me, Michael Davis is opening for Julio Iglesias. I'm going to arrange for you to go to the show and you pitch the idea and see if he'd be willing to play you in a sitcom. By the way, when Billy Crystal couldn't do it, I suggested Paul Reiser, who was not known yet. I called Paul, who I knew, and I said, would you be willing to play me? I remember the day I called him from a parking garage on 54th Street near Studio 54. And I said, would you be willing to play me? And he said, sure. And then about 2 weeks later, he got his own sitcom. So that never happened either. And so I lost my train of thought. I forgot what I was telling you. Sometimes I get caught up because there's so many stories. I'm trying to remember where I was. Jack Rollins, had wanted me. So I go to the show where Julio Iglesias is performing in Hawaii. And for some reason, Michael Davis forgot that he was supposed to be there that night. He thought it was the next night. And he didn't show up and he got fired. And when he came to the theater, I had to present my idea to him, to a guy that just got fired. That's a Woody Allen movie in itself. It's not supposed to happen. Obviously, he was not in a good mood. And he said to me, what do I need your idea for? I have my own ideas. I had to tell Jack, sorry, it's not going to happen. So what happened was I wound up getting friendly with Woody's managers, Jack Rollins and Charlie Jaffe. Both of them were both very helpful to me in many different ways, very supportive. But they both said it's a very unusual story that Woody took the time out to meet with me and read my stuff. And so it was a very special event. And years later, I met him again. We were actually seated next to each other at Elaine's, and we were both in Cindy Adams' column that day. And I said to him, I'm sure this is a lot more important to me than it is to you. And then his best friend was a man named John Dumanian, who was married to Jean Dumanian, who produced Saturday Night Live for 1 year. And I got invited to this thing. Woody played the clarinet in a band every Monday night at a hotel on the Upper East Side. And they invited me to come. And so I actually made them laugh that night. They brought me backstage after the show. John Dumanian was going to reintroduce me to Woody because we hadn't seen each other in so many years. And he was hesitating during the introduction for whatever. And I was about to say to Woody, Woody, I'm a very good friend of Jack Rollins. But for some reason, at the very last minute, I changed it. And I said, hi, Woody, I'm a very good friend of yours. And that just made him laugh. He just busted out laughing. And he goes, really, how long do we know each other? And I'm like, decades. And then we took pictures together. And it was the night I made Woody Allen laugh, So that's my Woody Allen story.
Some of the best things you come up with will come up in the moment. You best laid plans, right, Jeffrey?
I could have never planned it. I don't know what made me say that. It was just a spur of the moment thing. Hey, Woody, I'm a very good friend of yours. I just felt like it's a strange thing to say to somebody that you haven't seen in many years, who doesn't know who you are. How do you do? I'm a very good friend of yours. And we took pictures together that night, and he almost smiled for the pictures. Not quite, but almost. He's not a big picture taker, but it was just so interesting how our paths crossed from those early days.
I'd like to hear a little bit of your life being in the Friars Club, because I believe that closed down and that's history.
Yeah, it's over. It's over. I was so glad I got to be there in its heyday when, Milton Berle gave them the building. And for him to be my sponsor, you had to be sponsored by two people. So when I was in Los Angeles, he was the president of the LA Friars. Lost their ability in a lawsuit. They lost the ability to use the name Friars Club. I don't remember what happened, but he sponsored me for membership in New York, so there was no problem for me getting in. And I was working at the time. There was a man named Bob Sachs. I think his grandfather owned Saks Fifth Avenue. It was SAKS, and Bob was producing the Friars Roast, and he was friendly with all the big stars. And that's how I got to meet Jerry Lewis and write for him. I spent 2 nights alone in Jerry Lewis's hotel room, just the two of us working on material, which was so amazing to me. And while I was with him, he got a phone call that they discovered the gene that caused the Duchenne form of muscular dystrophy, which was his charity. You know, he did that every year.
The tele
The telethon for muscular dystrophy every year for so many years. And I'm with him, and he gets the phone call that they discovered the gene that caused the Duchenne form of muscular dystrophy, and he's crying. Tears are running down his face, and it's just me and him, and I'm there to share that moment with him. Really, really an amazing thing. And you know, people always said he was a nasty guy. So nice to meet, because it depends on how you meet people. You know, like I was sent there by Bob Sachs to his hotel. Why would he be nasty? And we just had the best time. We were laughing, and I'm writing jokes for him, and it was so great, you know. And that's how I got to meet Bruce Willis, writing his roast. And so for 12 years, I was the main writer for the Friars Roast. So I got to know everybody. I have pictures, you know, for the Sid Caesar roast. It was the first time I wrote for 5 different people on the dais. Dick Shawn's son-in-law, Joey Travolta, who was John Travolta's brother, who was a singer. He was performing there. And I got to write for Dick Shawn, and just all the greats of that era, you know. I got to work with Buddy Hackett, you know, and I got to meet all the stars that I watched on TV growing up as a little kid, never thinking, how am I going to know them? I have walls of pictures of me with these people, Jan Murray and Morty Gunty, and, you know, just stars from that era, from the golden age of comedy. And I got to meet them all, you know. Sid Caesar, I went to see him. George Burns,
Okay, George
Sammy.
Burns, I got to hear this one.
Well, George Burns I met through Milton. He was performing in the Catskill Mountains. I believe he was at Grossinger's. And I'm involved in a documentary about Grossinger's. I was recently interviewed about it because I was there as a child. I used to sing. I was in a professional choir, and I sang solo. And as a kid, we were there for the high holidays, the Jewish holidays. They would have services at all the big hotels, Concord, Grossinger's, and Jenny Grossinger used to come out to greet me because I was a cute little kid. From when I was 10 to 13, I sang in the hotels, and she used to come out, and she was the first woman to actually run hotels. She broke ground for women in the entertainment industry. Grossinger's had its own airport, and they would fly in the big stars to perform. They had their own ski mountain. They had, I mean, there's never been a hotel like that since, you know. So Bob Friedman of Bungalow Entertainment is doing a documentary on Grossinger's, and he had me be interviewed for that because I was there as a child, and then I was there as an adult as a comedy writer, and that's where I met. I went to meet George Burns because Milton sent me, and he goes, "Tell George I said hi." So I went backstage and we took pictures together, because when Milton Berle sends you someplace, no one's telling you no, you can't come in, you know. And that's how I met Sammy Davis Jr. at a Friars Roast, because he was performing with Jerry Lewis, and I got to write material for them. They had been friends for 40 years and never performed on the same stage before. And then Jerry said to me, "I want you to write material for me. Sammy and I are going to be performing together for the first time in 40 years." And I got to do that. So I got to do some amazing, really amazing things. these are memories that I cherish, and I have the pictures to prove them. Me with George Burns, who played God. And what's interesting, they all lived to very old ages, Burl was 93, Youngman was 91, Bob Hope was 100, and George Burns lived to 100. In those days, it was a kinder comedy too, A lot of comedy these days is very mean-spirited. But in those days, when I wrote for the roast, I would go over to the person being honored and I would say, is there anything that you don't want to make jokes about, that you're sensitive about? Because I never wanted to hurt anybody's feelings. These days, they often try to hurt your feelings with jokes. And, that's something that I'm not a big fan of that. But anyway, all of this started me in writing my happiness books. And I want to talk about that before we run out of time, because I was always fascinated by thought. As I said, I conquered what I consider a smaller obstacle by conquering stuttering. But I wrote my first happiness book was the one that I said, Healing Your Heart by Changing Your Mind. It's about letting go of the pains of childhood so that you can change the way you think. In order for me to stop stuttering, I had to let go of these heart wounds that I talk about. And I talk about sensitivity, the power of kindness, the power of thought. Changing, one of the quotes from my book is, you can't change your past. The only thing you could change is your perspective of your past. It's how you view the events in your life. It's the reason why you could have siblings that are completely different. And if you ask them about their childhood, you'd think they had different parents, because their perspective, their experience, their interpretation of their experience is so different. I talk about gratitude and service and about how your inner child should be your best friend. My inner child is my best friend. When you come to my place, it's filled with balloons and crayons. You would think little children live here. My kids are grown up, but my place is filled with toys, and I do that for me, because like when you were a little girl and your friends would come to your house and say, can Linda come out to play? You'd be all excited. That's not supposed to stop just because you grow up. You're supposed to still have fun and stay connected to that. My second book was called Fight the Fear, because I talked about fighting fear. And so I fight the fear on a daily basis. I never let, fear is a bully that tells you that you'll never be successful, that you'll never achieve your goals, that you're not enough. You're not young enough, you're not smart enough, you're not this enough or that enough. It's a lie. It's the part of our subconscious mind that doesn't want us to succeed. So I wrote this book called Fight the Fear, Overcoming Obstacles That Stand in Your Way. And it came out as a #1 in many different categories, in mental health and adult children of alcoholics and so many different, ADHD. I got amazing reviews from people. And on the back are reviews from PhDs, psychiatrists, and psychologists who recommend my work. Even though that's not my field, I spent 20 years on the board of the Association for Spirituality and Psychotherapy. And they accepted my work in 1999. I approached Dr. Henry Grayson, who was the founder of the National Institute of the Psychotherapies. And I said, my training is different than yours, but these are my thoughts, and this is what I work with. The physical symptoms of stress, like migraine headaches. When I was at NYU, I was teaching doctors how to take away headaches just using your hands, the energy from your hands. And on a very simple level, if you're upset and someone gives you a hug and you feel better, it's because you allowed them to transfer positive energy to you. So that's in my book, Fight the Fear. And then when I was recovering from COVID in March of 2020, I got COVID double pneumonia and I was in the hospital and I was really very sick. It took me months to recover. And while I was in the hospital, I wrote my while I was recovering at home, I wrote my third happiness book, and it's called Facing Adversity, stories of courage and inspiration. And it's true stories that I've collected over 20 years. In 1999, I started cutting out articles in newspapers and magazines of people that did amazing things, that conquered unbelievable obstacles to go on to lead happy and meaningful lives. A quick example, a little 3-year-old boy was playing hide and seek, and he hid behind a tractor, and the tractor was running, and he put his hands in and it cut off his hands. And his father was a surgeon, and he saw it happen, and he rushed him to the hospital. And it was a holiday, there were no transplant surgeons around. The father had never done any kind of surgery like that, and he assembled a team of surgeons, and he reattached the little boy's hands, and he put them in casts. He didn't know if it would be successful or not. A few months later, they took off the casts. The hands were alive, but they weren't functional. The grandfather was a martial artist, and he trained the little boy every day growing up. And today, that little boy is a famous spinal surgeon, and he runs the surgery clinic at a hospital in Colorado. That can't even happen. Those are the stories that blow me away. I've done surgery. I know what a steady hand you need. Spinal surgery is one of the most complicated. And for this little boy to have lost his hands and today to be the head of spinal surgery at a hospital in Colorado is mind-blowing to me. So this book is filled with stories like that because people need inspiration. Many times people feel that they're stuck in life. They have so many problems that they can't go ahead. They can't function. And this book is meant to inspire them, to show them that no matter what's going on in your life, that there's still a way out. You could draw on your inner strength, sometimes that you don't even know that you have, and you can overcome these things. And all these books became bestsellers on Amazon. And I always appreciate being able to talk about them because after the last 4 years, people are very stressed out and they need inspiration. They need motivation, especially people that want to break into comedy. So those are my special books. And this book is the one that came out of the Woody Allen stuff, Man Robs Bank with His Chin, and other unusual stories missed by mainstream media. And it's got blurbs from Richard Lewis, my dear friend from Curb Your Enthusiasm, who we also lost this year, Colin Jost, the head writer of Saturday Night Live, and Nick Kroll, who said to me, Jeffrey Gurian asked me to write a blurb for his book, and this is it. Yeah, and it's a book of very crazy, unusual stories. Man robs bank with his chin, and other unusual stories. So if you like silly comedy that doesn't offend anybody, then that's the book for you.
I love that. Well, before we head off, I want to ask you a thought-provoking question.
Go ahead.
It's two-part. The first part is, what's the one thing you've done that you think people will remember you by the most? And the second half of my question is, what is it that you have not yet done that you have to do before you cross over to the other side?
Well, honestly, by the reviews I've gotten on my books, I would think that that would have the greatest effect on people. Just at this last thing in Minneapolis, a woman came over to me who said, I have to thank you. I read your book and it's helping me get through my divorce. I didn't know what I was going to do. And hearing your story about how you handled that is helping me get through that. Those are the kind of reviews that I have. If you look on Amazon and you see the reviews on the book, you'll see people calling them life-changing. And so that's not my words. I didn't say it. Those are the things that people wrote to say the kind of effect that it had on them. So books last forever, and as far as what I want to do, I don't know. I wouldn't mind doing that sitcom. I've been approached by a big production company. I can't say too much about it, but because of my schedule, because of my work, I've never been able to go on tour. And they want to put me on tour doing this big thing. And I don't know if it's going to happen. They saw my documentary and they said, you have a very unusual story and we want to do a big project about you. So I'm open to it. We'll see. You know, I have no control over what the universe has in store for me. Everybody has their path, you know, and as long as it's something positive, I'm open to it, you know. I have no idea. I live in the moment. Right now, our only reality, Linda, is you and I speaking on Zoom. That's it. I'm not thinking about what I have to do later, although I do know tonight I'm kicking off the first of a 12-week series of lectures, inspirational lectures that I'm doing for a talent company to inspire people that want to break into show business, either actors or models or something. And, you know, I get asked to do very interesting things. So I don't know what the universe has in store for me, but whatever it is, I hope it's something where it's positive, where I can bring positive energy to the universe. That's always my goal. And so thanks so much for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time, and I'll share this everywhere along with links. You sent me quite a few different, your website and any other places. Let's see, I have Comedy Matters, the and
ComedyMattersTV.com is the website, but YouTube is youtube.com/Comedy Matters TV. Instagram is very important. That's at Jeffrey Gurian, Gurian. And for people who stutter, I have a special website. If you know anybody who stutters, have them read it and see if it makes sense to them. It's www.stopstutteringnowgurian.com. Stopstutteringnowgurian.com. And all my books, I sent you those links. You could put them up on Amazon, and that would be great.
you got it. Thank you so much for your time. I have a silly question to end this with. You ready?
Sure.
Okay, I can't resist. So you are a practicing orthodontist, correct?
No, I'm not practicing. I was a cosmetic dentist and I retired some years ago, which is why it was a great honor that they asked me to speak at their annual convention.
Got it.
I
So,
just I just lecture on it. So go
okay,
ahead.
so when you were talking about at the very beginning, you said, I don't know, like something about, I don't know how I would think that as an orthodontist that would have anything to do with comedy. And I came up with something that they have in common.
Well, Cindy Adams once said, she said, I make people laugh to see if they have any teeth missing.
I was
That,
thinking that they both have to do with making good impressions.
sure. That's not a silly question. That's a statement. And it makes a lot of sense. That
Yes.
was that was supposed to be the title of the sitcom that Jack Rollins wanted me to do with Billy Crystal. First Impressions.
Wow.
That was the name of the show. So who knows? Someday it could happen.
I'd like to see you be a judge on America's Got Talent because you would be positive and fair and uplifting to the world.
Well, see if you can make that happen, Linda. If
Um,
you can, I'd be more than happy to do it.
Absolutely. That would be so great. All right. Well, thank you so much again for coming on. You guys, that's Jeffrey Gurian. And if you didn't know him, now you do, folks. Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
You're very welcome. Have a great day. We'll
See you in
talk soon.
February.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now.